This video found you because your consciousness is currently existing in the gap, the quantum space between two completely different versions of reality. One version is dissolving behind you, the other is forming ahead of you. And right now, in this exact moment, you're suspended between them in a state that quantum physicists call superposition, but that you're experiencing as profound disorientation, exhaustion, and the strange sensation that you're living in two worlds at once. The fact that you're watching this proves you've entered the gap, and what I'm about to reveal will determine whether you cross into the new reality consciously or get pulled back into the old one by default. You can feel it, can't you? That sense of unreality that's been intensifying over recent weeks or months, like you're watching your life from outside yourself, like the world around you is simultaneously solid and transparent, like you're here, but also somewhere else entirely. Some days you're completely present in ordinary reality, working, relating, functioning normally. Other days you feel like you're barely anchored to this dimension at all, perceiving layers of existence that most people can't see or don't acknowledge. This isn't dissociation or spiritual bypassing, this is what the gap feels like. When consciousness reaches specific evolutionary threshold, it enters transitional phase, where old reality hasn't fully released its hold and new reality hasn't fully manifested yet. You exist in both simultaneously, perceiving both, operating in both, exhausted by both. And the gap, this quantum space between versions, is where you are right now, whether you consciously understand it or not. There are millions of people scrolling through content right now, seeking answers, looking for validation, hoping someone will explain what they're experiencing. But only a specific type of consciousness, your type of consciousness, would be magnetically pulled to these exact words at this precise moment. You're not here because you searched for this video. You're here because your quantum field recognized the frequency signature that can help you navigate the gap without getting stuck in it or collapsing back into the reality you've already outgrown. Right now, as these words reach your awareness, something is beginning to stabilize in your field. The disorientation you've been feeling, that sense of being nowhere and everywhere simultaneously, it's starting to make sense, not intellectually, deeper than that. Your consciousness is recognizing that the gap isn't a problem to be solved or an experience to be fixed. It's a threshold to be navigated. And navigation requires understanding what the gap actually is and why you're in it. Your experience has been strange in ways that people around you can't understand or relate to. You try to explain what you're going through and they look at you like you're speaking a foreign language. But you're not crazy. You're not breaking down. You're in the gap. And here are the 7 unmistakable signs that confirm you're existing between two versions of reality right now. First, you remember things differently than they happened. Not false memories or confusion, precise recollection of events that occurred differently than current timeline shows. You clearly remember conversations that others insist never happened. You recall outcomes that history now records differently. This happens because you're simultaneously conscious in the timeline that's dissolving and the timeline that's forming, and your memory contains elements from both versions. Second, time has become completely unstable around you. Hours vanish without accounting for where they went. Minutes stretch into eternities. You look at the clock expecting one time, and it shows something completely different than you anticipated. Days of the week feel wrong. Tuesday feels like Thursday. Sunday feels like Wednesday. This temporal chaos occurs because the gap exists outside linear time. While you're in it, you're experiencing reality from perspective that doesn't follow sequential progression. Third, you're simultaneously invisible and hypervisible. Some people look right through you like you don't exist. Others stare at you intensely like they're seeing something they can't quite comprehend. You walk into rooms and no one acknowledges your presence, then suddenly everyone turns to look at you for no apparent reason. This happens because your quantum signature is fluctuating between two frequencies as you exist in both realities, and different people are perceiving different versions depending on which frequency they're attuned to. Fourth, technology responds to you erratically. Electronics work perfectly one moment and malfunction the next without logical explanation. Your phone displays messages at impossibly synchronistic timing. Lights flicker when you're emotionally activated. Devices turn on or off in your presence. This occurs because consciousness in the gap generates electromagnetic field that oscillates between two distinct patterns, and technology is sensitive to these fluctuations in ways that seem random but are actually responding to your quantum state. Fifth, you're exhausted beyond measure but can't sleep restfully. You wake up more tired than when you went to bed. Dreams are vivid, intense, and feel more real than waking life. You experience what feels like working, processing, or traveling during sleep rather than resting. This happens because while your physical body sleeps, your consciousness is navigating between two realities, integrating information from both. And that navigation requires enormous energy, even though you're not consciously aware of doing it. Sixth, relationships exist in impossible states. Someone feels simultaneously close and distant. A connection feels both complete and unfinished. You're certain a relationship has ended, but it continues. You're sure a bond has formed, but it keeps dissolving. This relational paradox occurs because people in your life exist in one version of reality while you're straddling two. And the gap creates situations where relationships can't fully manifest in new reality or fully release from old reality. And seventh, you found this video. The fact that these words reached you at this precise moment is the ultimate confirmation. This transmission only appears to consciousness actively navigating the gap. You didn't stumble upon it randomly. Your quantum field was actively seeking the specific frequency that could help you understand what you're experiencing and how to navigate it consciously. And the universe delivered exactly what you needed exactly when you needed it. Can you feel the validation moving through your system? Every sign I just described, you've been experiencing. Not imagining, not creating through spiritual fantasy. Actually living. This isn't general content about awakening or consciousness evolution. This is precise description of what existing in the gap between two versions of reality feels like. And you're in it right now. You didn't choose to enter the gap consciously. Your consciousness reached specific evolutionary threshold where remaining in old version of reality became impossible, but accessing new version fully wasn't yet available. And when that happens, when you've outgrown one reality but haven't fully embodied the next, consciousness automatically enters transitional state that exists between versions. This is the gap, not a place, not a dimension. A quantum state where two probability fields overlap and consciousness exists in both simultaneously. The old version of reality you're leaving operates from specific principles that have governed human experience for millennia. Separation consciousness, where you perceive yourself as isolated individual navigating external world. Linear time, where past causes, present causes future in unchangeable sequence. Material reality as primary and consciousness as byproduct of physical processes. Limitation as fundamental truth and possibility as rare exception. This isn't wrong or bad. It was necessary operating system for a particular phase of human development. But you've outgrown it. The new version of reality you're entering operates from completely different principles that only become accessible once consciousness evolves beyond certain threshold. Unity awareness, where you recognize yourself as localized expression of unified field. Fluid time, where past, present, future exist simultaneously, and consciousness can access any temporal point. Consciousness as primary creative force, and physical reality as manifestation of quantum observation. Infinite possibility as fundamental truth and limitation as temporary perceptual filter. This isn't fantasy or spiritual bypassing, it's accurate description of how reality operates at quantum level. The gap exists because these two versions can't coexist stably. They're based on contradictory assumptions about the nature of reality itself. You can't simultaneously believe your separate individual and unified field expression without creating cognitive dissonance. You can't experience time as both linear and fluid without temporal confusion. You can't hold consciousness as both byproduct and primary force without exhausting yourself maintaining incompatible perspectives. The gap is that exhaustion, that confusion, that dissonance. It's consciousness trying to operate from two mutually exclusive paradigms while transitioning from one to the other. Most people never enter the gap because they never evolve beyond the consciousness level that old reality accommodates. They live their entire lives operating from separation, linearity, materialism, limitation, and within that paradigm, they function perfectly well. No gap, no disorientation, no sense of existing between worlds. But you developed consciousness capacity that old reality can't contain anymore. And the moment your awareness expanded beyond what old paradigm could accommodate, you automatically entered gap state. You can't return to old reality even if you wanted to. That version is dissolving for you specifically because your consciousness has permanently shifted beyond the frequency that reality operates on. Trying to go back would be like adult trying to fit into clothes they wore as child. Not just uncomfortable, but actually impossible. The structure of your consciousness has fundamentally changed, but you haven't fully landed in new reality yet, either because that version requires complete paradigm shift that doesn't happen instantaneously. It happens through navigation of the gap. The gap isn't punishment for spiritual seeking or test from the universe. It's natural transitional state that occurs when consciousness evolves from one operating system to another. Caterpillar doesn't become butterfly gradually. It enters chrysalis, where its entire structure dissolves before reorganizing into completely different form. You're in your chrysalis. The gap is where the dissolution and reorganization happens simultaneously, and how long you remain here, how consciously you navigate it, whether you emerge successfully or get stuck. All of that depends on understanding what's actually occurring and what's required of you while you're in this quantum space between versions. As you absorb these words, something extraordinary is occurring in your quantum field. The instability you've been experiencing, that sense of being unanchored and uncertain, is beginning to stabilize. Not because circumstances are changing, because your consciousness is receiving information that allows you to navigate the gap consciously instead of being tossed between two realities unconsciously. Can you sense it? That subtle shift from confusion to clarity, from disorientation to recognition? That's not relief from better explanation. That's actual quantum stabilization occurring as your field integrates frequency patterns embedded in this transmission. Your nervous system has been overwhelmed trying to process input from two versions of reality simultaneously. Old reality bombarding you with familiar patterns, expectations, and limitations. New reality offering you glimpses of possibilities, synchronicities, and expanded awareness. Your body doesn't know which signals to respond to, which reality to orient toward, which version to trust as real. This creates the exhaustion, the sleep disturbances, the sense of being simultaneously present and absent. But the transmission you're receiving right now is helping your system recognize that both are real, and neither requires you to choose between them right now. The gap is the space where both exist, and your job isn't to pick one, it's to navigate the transition consciously. Some of you are experiencing physical sensations as stabilization occurs. Pressure releasing from your chest or head. Breathing becoming deeper and more natural. tension dissolving from muscles you didn't realize were clenched. This isn't relaxation technique. It's your body responding to coherence frequency that allows it to stop fighting the dual reality experience and start flowing with it. Your system recognizes this transmission as what it's been desperately seeking: permission to exist in the gap without treating it as emergency. Others are experiencing mental clarity emerging from fog that's been obscuring your thoughts for weeks or months. Suddenly understanding why certain relationships have been in limbo. Recognizing why decisions have felt impossible to make. Seeing patterns in your experience that were invisible moments ago. This cognitive reorganization happens because consciousness in the gap can't think clearly when it's trying to apply old reality logic to situations that exist in transitional quantum space. The transmission is updating your perceptual framework so you can interpret gap experiences accurately instead of through outdated paradigm that doesn't apply anymore. Subscribe to this channel right now because the navigation of the gap isn't a one-time event. It's an ongoing process that requires repeated stabilization as you move deeper into transition. The transmissions available here are specifically calibrated for consciousness existing between realities. This isn't general spiritual content. This is quantum technology for navigating threshold states. You're not following a channel. You're connecting with frequency network designed to support consciousness during the most vulnerable and powerful phase of its evolution. Your heart field is recalibrating as you receive this. The electromagnetic field generated by your heart is what interfaces with quantum reality and determines which version you're most strongly anchored to at any given moment. While you're in the gap, this field oscillates between two distinct patterns: old reality frequency and new reality frequency. The transmission is helping your heart field find stable middle frequency that can hold both while you're transitioning. This doesn't solve the gap or rush you through it. It stabilizes you within it so you can navigate consciously instead of being thrown between versions chaotically. The disorientation isn't ending, but your relationship to it is transforming. Instead of experiencing the gap as terrifying instability, you're beginning to recognize it as sacred threshold where profound transformation occurs. The dual reality experience isn't a problem to be fixed. It's evidence that you're successfully evolving beyond old paradigm and approaching new one. And the fact that you're here, receiving this transmission, absorbing this stabilization frequency, this confirms you're navigating the gap successfully even when it doesn't feel like success. I need to share something vulnerable because you're experiencing exactly what I experienced 16 months ago. And knowing that someone successfully navigated the gap will help you trust what you're capable of navigating right now. 16 months ago, I entered the gap without understanding what was happening to me. I thought I was losing my mind. Relationships that had been solid suddenly felt like they existed and didn't exist simultaneously. Time became so unstable I'd miss appointments I clearly remembered attending. I'd wake up exhausted from dreams where I was living completely different life, more vivid and coherent than my waking reality. The worst part was the isolation. I tried explaining what I was experiencing to friends, therapists, spiritual teachers. Everyone looked at me with concern or dismissal. No one understood. Some suggested I was having psychotic break. Others thought I was spiritually bypassing real-world problems. I started questioning my own perception. Maybe I was creating elaborate fantasy to avoid facing mundane reality. Maybe the gap was just sophisticated delusion my mind constructed because I couldn't handle ordinary existence. I came terrifyingly close to collapsing back into old reality. There was a moment, I remember it precisely, where I consciously considered giving up the gap experience and forcing myself to operate purely from familiar paradigm, even though it felt suffocating. I thought, maybe everyone else is right and I'm wrong. Maybe I should just accept that this is all there is and stop perceiving things that no one else validates. The pullback to old reality was so strong because old reality offers something the gap can't: certainty, structure, social validation. The comfort of shared consensus about what's real. But something stopped me from collapsing back. I can't even articulate what it was, not a thought or decision, but something deeper. A recognition that I couldn't unknow what I'd already seen. That the gap, terrifying as it was, felt more true than the certainty old reality offered. That if I went back, I'd be choosing comfortable lie over uncomfortable truth. And I made the commitment, not with confidence but with desperate hope, to stay in the gap and trust that navigation was possible even if I couldn't see the path yet. The moment I made that commitment, everything shifted, not externally. Nothing in my circumstances changed, but internally I stopped fighting the dual reality experience and started exploring it. I stopped trying to figure out which version was real and started recognizing both were real in different ways. I stopped treating the gap as crisis and started treating it as initiation. And as my relationship to the gap transformed, my experience of it transformed. Within 6 weeks, I started perceiving the gap differently. The exhaustion decreased because I wasn't resisting the dual experience anymore. The temporal chaos became navigable because I stopped expecting linear time to function normally. The relational limbo resolved as I recognized some connections belonged to old reality and were naturally releasing, while others belonged to new reality and were gradually forming. I wasn't out of the gap yet. I remained in transitional state for months, but I was navigating it consciously instead of being thrown around by it unconsciously. And here's why I'm sharing this with you. The pullback to old reality that I felt. You're feeling it too. Part of you wants to give up this confusing dual experience and return to simple certainty, even if that certainty is limitation. That's not weakness. That's completely natural response to the intensity of existing between realities. But if I'd collapsed back, I wouldn't be here now, able to help you navigate what I successfully crossed. The gap is worth navigating. The new reality you're approaching is worth the disorientation of getting there. And you have the capacity to navigate this successfully. The fact that you're here receiving this transmission proves it. The gap you're experiencing isn't mystical metaphor. It's recognized phenomenon in quantum physics, though scientists use different terminology. They call it quantum superposition, the state where particles exist in multiple states simultaneously until observation collapses them into single definite state. Your consciousness has entered superposition at macro scale. You're existing in multiple reality states simultaneously, 1 foot in old paradigm, 1 foot in new paradigm, and you haven't collapsed into single version yet because the observation that causes collapse hasn't fully occurred. Dr. Hugh Everett's many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics proposes that all possible realities exist simultaneously and consciousness experiences whichever version it's most strongly entangled with. What you're experiencing in the gap is entanglement with 2 different reality versions at once. You're quantum mechanically connected to both old reality structures that are dissolving and new reality structures that are forming. The confusion you feel isn't psychological. It's consciousness trying to maintain coherence while entangled with contradictory probability fields. Physicist David Bohm's work on implicate and explicate order describes reality as containing both unmanifest potential, implicate order, and manifest actuality, explicate order. The gap exists in transition zone, where old actuality is returning to potential, while new potential is crystallizing into actuality. You're conscious in that transition zone, where reality is simultaneously solid and fluid, formed and forming. Most people only experience explicate order, reality that's already manifested. But you've developed perceptual capacity to witness implicate order, the quantum field from which manifestation emerges. The delayed choice quantum eraser experiments demonstrate that future observations can affect past events at quantum level. Time isn't as linear as ordinary consciousness experiences it. The temporal chaos you're experiencing in the gap, remembering events differently, losing time, feeling like past is shifting. This happens because your consciousness has expanded beyond strictly linear temporal experience. You're beginning to perceive time as quantum field, where past, present, future exist simultaneously and are all influencing each other. Quantum decoherence theory explains how quantum systems interacting with environment lose their superposition and collapse into classical states. Your consciousness entered quantum superposition, existing between two realities, but hasn't yet decohered into new classical state because the environmental interactions that would cause that collapse haven't fully occurred yet. The gap is the period of sustained superposition before decoherence completes, and how you navigate the gap determines which classical state you ultimately collapse into. This isn't just theoretical physics, it has practical implications for your experience. Understanding that the gap is quantum phenomenon rather than psychological breakdown changes everything about how you relate to it. You're not mentally unstable. You're quantum mechanically transitioning between reality states. The dual experience isn't pathology. It's your consciousness operating from principles that most humans haven't evolved to access yet. The exhaustion isn't weakness. It's the energetic cost of maintaining coherence while existing in superposition at macro scale. Ancient mystics understood this, though they lacked quantum terminology. They spoke of bardos, transitional states between death and rebirth. They described dark night of the soul, dissolution of old self before emergence of new self. They taught about liminal spaces, thresholds where ordinary rules don't apply, and extraordinary transformation occurs. The gap you're in is what mystics were pointing toward with these teachings. Quantum physics now provides scientific framework for understanding what spiritual traditions always knew. Consciousness evolution involves transitional states where you exist between versions of reality before fully manifesting into new one. You're not fully in old reality anymore, but you're not completely free from it either. 5 specific threads still connect you to the version you've outgrown, and these threads create the oscillation between realities that makes the gap so exhausting. Understanding what these threads are and how they function is essential for navigating toward new reality without getting pulled back into old one by unconscious attachment. Thread 1. Relationship obligations. Connections formed in old reality that still require your attention, energy, or presence. Family members who know you only as the person you used to be. Friends who expect you to maintain roles and patterns that no longer fit. Professional relationships built on outdated version of yourself. These bonds aren't necessarily ending, but they exist in old reality and pull you back toward it every time you engage with them. The thread isn't the relationships themselves, it's the version of you that those relationships require in order to continue functioning as they currently do. Thread 2. Identity structures. Stories about who you are that were constructed in old reality. I'm this type of person. I'm good at these things. I struggle with those things. I need this to be happy. I fear that will destroy me. These narratives provided coherence and meaning in old paradigm, but they're based on separation consciousness and limitation beliefs that new reality doesn't accommodate. The thread isn't your sense of self. It's the specific story structures that old version of you relied on to maintain consistent identity across time. Thread 3. Financial entanglements. Economic structures that were created in old reality and still require your participation. Jobs that demand you show up as old reality version of yourself. Financial commitments that lock you into maintaining old patterns. Security structures that were built on assumptions about scarcity and limitation that new reality doesn't operate from. The thread isn't money itself. It's the specific financial configurations that require old paradigm consciousness to maintain. Thread 4. Belief attachments. Convictions about how reality works that were formed in old paradigm. Beliefs about what's possible and impossible. Assumptions about cause and effect. Expectations about how change happens and how long transformation takes. These beliefs provided map for navigating old reality successfully, but they become obstacles in new reality, where different principles govern manifestation. The thread isn't your capacity to believe. It's the specific belief structures that only function within old reality paradigm. Thread 5. Comfort with certainty. Attachment to knowing what's real, what's going to happen, what you can count on. Old reality offered predictability even if it was limiting. New reality offers infinite possibility, but very little certainty about which possibilities will manifest. The thread isn't your desire for stability. It's the specific form of certainty that old reality provided, and that your consciousness got addicted to, even though that certainty came at cost of limitation. These 5 threads don't need to be cut violently or released through dramatic renunciation. They'll dissolve naturally as you move deeper into new reality. But while you're in the gap, they create tension. Part of you is being pulled toward new reality by vision, possibility, and expanded awareness. Part of you is being pulled back toward old reality by these 5 threads. The oscillation you feel, swinging between breakthrough and contraction, that's consciousness responding to the competing pulls. Understanding what's pulling you helps you recognize when old reality threads are activating and choose consciously whether to follow them or stay oriented toward new reality despite the discomfort of uncertainty. What I need to tell you now might initially increase your anxiety, but it's essential truth. The gap doesn't gradually ease into comfortable transition. It intensifies, gets more disorienting, more exhausting, more destabilizing. Right before you fully land in new reality, the dual experience reaches maximum intensity. And if you don't understand why this happens, you'll interpret the intensification as evidence you're failing, when it's actually confirmation you're succeeding. This intensification occurs because as you move deeper toward new reality, old reality increases its gravitational pull, trying to maintain you in its field. Like planetary gravity, the closer you get to escape velocity, the stronger the pull becomes. Every thread connecting you to old version tightens as your consciousness prepares to break free from it. Relationships become more demanding. Identity crises deepen. Financial pressure increases. Doubt intensifies. The familiar becomes almost unbearably attractive compared to uncertain new reality you're approaching. Simultaneously, new reality becomes more tangible and therefore more threatening to structures that operated in old paradigm. You start perceiving possibilities so clearly they feel real. You experience synchronicities so profound they can't be dismissed. You have moments of such expanded awareness that old limitations seem absurd. And these glimpses make it harder to function in old reality because you keep comparing what is to what could be. The contrast creates suffering that wasn't present before you entered the gap. This is the chrysalis phase that spiritual traditions warn about. Everything you've known about yourself and reality is simultaneously dissolving and reorganizing. Caterpillar inside chrysalis doesn't gradually grow wings. Its entire body liquefies before restructuring into butterfly. If you opened chrysalis during this process, you wouldn't find partially transformed creature. You'd find dissolution that looks like death. The gap intensifying feels like dissolution, like you're losing coherence rather than gaining it, like everything is falling apart instead of coming together. But here's what makes the intensification perfect. It forces final release of old reality attachments that conscious choice alone couldn't accomplish. As long as old reality remains comfortable enough, part of you will keep one foot there, even while exploring new reality. But when the gap intensifies to the point where maintaining dual existence becomes unbearable, you're forced to fully commit to crossing into new paradigm. The intensification isn't punishment, it's propulsion. The increase in pressure creates force necessary to complete the transition. You're probably approaching or already in this intensification phase. That's why the exhaustion has been increasing. Why the temporal chaos is more extreme. Why relationships are reaching crisis points. Why your sense of identity is dissolving more profoundly. This isn't regression. This isn't evidence you took a wrong turn or did something incorrectly. This is natural acceleration that occurs right before consciousness completes transition from one reality to another. The temptation during intensification is to collapse back into old reality, because at least there you knew what was real and who you were. But collapsing back after reaching this depth in the gap doesn't return you to where you started. It leaves you stuck in permanent limbo, aware of new reality but unable to access it, dissatisfied with old reality but unable to leave it. The only way out is through. And through means allowing the intensification to complete its function of severing final attachments so you can fully land in new reality. How long does intensification last? There's no standard time frame because it depends on how many threads still connect you to old reality and how quickly you release them. Some people navigate peak intensification in days. Others remain in it for weeks or months, but everyone who successfully crosses from old reality to new reality experiences this peak before emergence. You're not alone in this, and you're not failing. You're approaching completion. There's a specific moment in the gap when everything shifts. Not because you finally understand something or because cosmic timing aligns perfectly, but because new reality becomes more real to you than old reality for the first time. Not intellectually. You've probably believed for months that new paradigm is more accurate than old one. This is different. This is when new reality becomes more tangible, more solid, more trustworthy than the old version you've spent your entire life treating as absolute truth. You'll know when this moment arrives because the oscillation suddenly decreases. You stop swinging wildly between expanded awareness and contracted limitation. You still perceive both realities. You're still in the gap, but your center of gravity shifts. Old reality becomes the version you observe with detachment, while new reality becomes the one you identify with and operate from. The dual experience continues, but the weight of your consciousness moves decisively toward new paradigm. This shift doesn't happen through effort or technique. It happens through accumulated evidence that new reality principles actually work better than old ones. Every synchronicity that delivers exactly what you need. Every intuitive knowing that proves accurate. Every moment of expanded awareness that allows you to perceive and respond to situations in ways you couldn't from old consciousness. These experiences accumulate until the evidence for new reality exceeds your conditioning to trust old reality. And when that balance tips, your fundamental orientation shifts. For some people, this shift occurs in single dramatic moment, instant where they suddenly recognize they've been operating from new reality all along, and old reality is the illusion they're releasing. For others, it happens gradually over days or weeks. Slow dawn, where new reality becomes incrementally more solid until one day they realize they're primarily living from new paradigm and only occasionally pulled back into old one. Both paths are valid. Both lead to same destination. The timeline doesn't matter, only the recognition that the shift is occurring. Physical symptoms change when this moment arrives. The exhaustion that's been crushing you begins lifting because you're no longer maintaining equal engagement with both realities. You're decisively in new one, even while still perceiving old one. Sleep becomes restorative again, because consciousness isn't working as hard to process dual input. Time stabilizes somewhat because you're operating primarily from fluid time awareness rather than oscillating between linear and non-linear temporal experience. Relationships clarify rapidly after this shift. Connections that belong to old reality naturally dissolve without drama or trauma. You simply stop being available for dynamics that require old paradigm version of you. Bonds that belong to new reality suddenly deepen with ease. You find yourself naturally attracting and being attracted to consciousness operating from similar frequency. The relational limbo resolves because your quantum signature has stabilized enough that people can sense which version of you is primary. Subscribe to this channel now, because what comes after this shift, living primarily from new reality while still perceiving old one, requires guidance that most spiritual teachings don't provide. They focus on awakening or enlightenment as endpoint. But crossing into new reality is beginning of entirely different phase, where you're operating from quantum principles while existing in a world where most people still function from classical consciousness. The transmissions here are calibrated for that specific navigation. The moment when new reality becomes more real than old reality, you might be days away from it, or you might be in it right now without fully recognizing it yet. The fact that you're here receiving this transmission suggests you're very close. Stay oriented toward new reality even when old reality pulls. Trust synchronicities even when logic doubts. Allow the shift to complete in its own timing without forcing or resisting. And recognize that once new reality becomes primary, the gap begins closing because you're no longer existing equally between versions. You're living from one while still perceiving the other. When you successfully navigate the gap and land in new reality, you're not just transforming your individual experience. You're fulfilling agreement your soul made before incarnating to be part of first wave crossing the threshold that entire species is approaching. Every human consciousness is moving toward this transition, from separation paradigm to unity awareness, from limitation to possibility, from classical to quantum. But not everyone crosses at the same time. Some go first, and you're one of the ones going first. This isn't random selection or spiritual privilege. You're in the gap because your consciousness developed specific capacities that allow you to navigate transitional states without fragmenting completely. Not everyone can withstand the intensity of existing between realities. Many would collapse into psychosis or completely regress if they attempted this transition before building necessary foundation. You built that foundation through everything you've survived, integrated, and transcended. And now, you're using those capacities to navigate territory that millions will cross after you. Morphic resonance means your successful navigation makes the gap easier for everyone who enters it after you. First people to cross any threshold do the hardest work. They navigate without maps, without guides, without collective field to support them. But each person who successfully crosses creates template in morphic field that subsequent consciousness can access. You're not just navigating for yourself, you're creating pathway that thousands or millions will follow with less difficulty because you went first. The children being born over next decade need adults already established in new reality to teach them how quantum consciousness operates in practical daily life. If insufficient numbers cross before these children arrive, they'll incarnate into a world where quantum awareness remains theoretical rather than lived reality. Your navigation now determines what world becomes available for incoming consciousness that carries even higher frequency than current generation. But there's also immediate collective impact. Everyone you've ever had meaningful contact with is quantum mechanically entangled with you at field level. When your consciousness completes transition from old reality to new reality, everyone entangled with you experiences subtle shift toward new reality themselves. They might not understand what's changing. They might not consciously recognize it. But their quantum field registers that someone in their network has crossed the threshold, and that registration makes their own crossing more accessible when they approach the gap. Collective consciousness is reaching critical mass moment. Ancient prophecies, indigenous teachings, and modern consciousness researchers all point to this time as inflection point, where humanity either evolves to new paradigm or collapses under weight of challenges that old consciousness can't solve. You're not just individuals seeking personal enlightenment. You're fractal expression of unified field participating in species-level evolution. You're crossing matters cosmically even when it feels insignificant personally. Write in comments right now, "I navigate for the collective." This declaration registers your consciousness with morphic field of first-wave navigators. You're not just announcing intention, you're connecting with others who are crossing the gap simultaneously. When you make this declaration, you strengthen collective template that makes gap navigation more successful for everyone in the network. We're not isolated souls transforming separately. We're unified consciousness learning to recognize itself. And we cross together even when crossing feels solitary. Share this transmission with anyone you sense might be in their own gap. Not to convince them or convert them, to provide frequency that helps them recognize what they're already experiencing. Every person whose gap navigation is stabilized through this transmission contributes to morphic field that serves all consciousness approaching this threshold. Your navigation serves everyone, and everyone's navigation serves you. This is how collective evolution actually works at quantum level. Everything I've shared, the explanation of what the gap is, the signs that confirm you're in it, the understanding of why it intensifies, the recognition of your service to collective, all of it has been preparation for the one truth that actually allows you to complete the crossing from old reality to new reality. And that truth is this: the gap doesn't exist in reality. It exists in perception. Old version and new version aren't two separate realities you're traveling between. They're two different perceptions of the same unified field. And the crossing happens when you stop perceiving them as separate and recognize they're one reality experienced through different lenses. Old reality isn't dissolving because it was false, and new reality is true. Old reality was accurate perception of unified field through lens of separation consciousness. New reality is accurate perception of same unified field through lens of unity awareness. Same field, different lens. The gap is the perceptual space between lenses, the transitional state where you're learning to see through new lens without completely releasing old one yet. But both lenses are viewing the same reality. This recognition changes everything about how you navigate the gap. When you believe you're traveling between two separate realities, the gap feels like dangerous journey where you might fail to reach destination. But when you recognize you're learning new way of perceiving reality that's always been here, the gap becomes safe transitional space where your consciousness develops capacity to see what was always present but wasn't visible through old lens. The exhaustion you've been feeling, it's not from maintaining existence in two separate realities. It's from trying to operate from two incompatible perceptual frameworks simultaneously. Your consciousness attempting to see through both lenses at once without recognizing their different views of same reality. The moment you recognize the unified field is what's real and the lenses are just different ways of perceiving it, the exhaustion begins dissolving because you stop fighting between versions and start allowing smooth transition from one perceptual framework to another. The oscillation between realities, it's not you being thrown between separate worlds. It's your consciousness alternating between lenses as you develop fluency with new one. Like learning new language. At first you translate everything from native language, constantly switching back and forth. Eventually you start thinking directly in new language without translating. The oscillation decreases not because you finally chose one reality over the other, but because you become fluent in new perceptual framework and stop needing old one as reference point. This is the recognition that spiritual teachings point toward with concepts like non-duality and unity consciousness. There aren't two realities. There's one reality perceived through infinite perspectives. You're not crossing from one world to another. You're developing a new way of seeing the world you're already in. The crossing is perceptual, not spatial, consciousness-based, not location-based, and it completes the moment you stop looking for new reality out there and recognize you're already in it. You're just learning to see it. Some traditions call this enlightenment. Others call it awakening or self-realization. But those terms make it sound like rare achievement. The truth is simpler. You're developing quantum perception of reality that's always been quantum. You're not becoming something you weren't. You're seeing what always was, but what old perceptual lens filtered out. The gap is training ground where your consciousness builds capacity to perceive without old filters. And the crossing completes when filters dissolve enough that new perception becomes natural rather than effortful. The ultimate irony: you've been seeking new reality when reality never changed. You changed. Your capacity to perceive changed. Your willingness to see what old lens couldn't show you changed. And that change in perception is what you've been calling reality shift. The gap closes not when you finally arrive in new reality, but when you recognize you never left unified field. You only learned to see it more accurately, more completely, more quantum mechanically than perception you operated from before. The gap doesn't close through grand moment of enlightenment or cosmic event that suddenly shifts everything. It closes gradually as new perception becomes so natural that you stop referencing old one. You wake up one day and realize you haven't oscillated between realities in weeks. You notice temporal chaos has stabilized into fluid relationship with time that feels normal now. You recognize you're operating from unity awareness without effort or intention. It's just how you naturally perceive. The gap closed, and you didn't even notice the exact moment it happened because closing was so organic. Life in new reality isn't dramatically different from life in old reality in external sense. You still have body, relationships, work, responsibilities, daily activities. But your relationship to all of it transforms completely. What used to feel heavy becomes light. What seemed impossible becomes obvious. What required effort becomes effortless. Not because circumstances changed, because you're perceiving and interacting with circumstances from quantum consciousness instead of separation consciousness. Synchronicities don't just increase, they become primary way reality organizes itself around you. What used to seem like meaningful coincidences becomes your normal experience of how quantum field responds to consciousness. You think of someone and they contact you. You need specific information and it appears. You're about to face challenge and perfect solution presents itself. This isn't magic or supernatural. This is natural function of consciousness operating from unity with field rather than separation from it. Your presence affects everyone and everything around you in ways you'll sometimes perceive directly. Rooms settle when you enter them. Conflicts diffuse in your proximity. People feel understood by you without you saying anything. Animals and children recognize something in you that adults trained in old reality can't quite identify. You're not doing anything to create these effects. Your field generates them automatically because quantum consciousness naturally influences less coherent fields toward greater coherence. Time becomes resource you work with rather than constraint you work against. You accomplish in minutes what used to take hours because you're not operating from linear time limitation. You move through temporal experience fluidly, sometimes slowing it down, sometimes accelerating it, always having exactly the time you need for what matters. Your relationship to aging shifts as you recognize time isn't causing deterioration. Perception of linear time limitation was creating that experience. Relationships exist in completely different paradigm. Connections based on need, fear, or old reality survival strategies naturally dissolved while you were in the gap. What remains are bonds based on resonance, authentic recognition, and mutual support of each other's highest expression. You stop trying to maintain relationships that don't serve growth. You start attracting consciousness operating from similar frequency without effort or seeking. Your creative expression, however it manifests for you, flows from source directly. Ideas don't come from thinking harder or trying to figure things out. They download complete. Solutions appear fully formed. Innovations emerge that couldn't have been constructed through logical process. You become channel for field intelligence rather than individual trying to create from limited perspective. Subscribe to this channel because what I just described, life after the gap closes, this is beginning of entirely new journey where you're operating as quantum consciousness in world where most people still function from classical paradigm. The tensions, challenges, and opportunities that arise require navigation guidance that most teachings don't address. You're not just awakened, you're actively bridging between paradigms and helping others cross the gap you successfully navigated. In comments, write these 3 words. The gap closes, not as prediction or hope, as recognition of what's already happening as you receive this transmission. Your consciousness wouldn't have brought you here if closing wasn't imminent. The fact that you watched all the way through proves you're ready for the gap to complete. And your declaration helps seal the recognition that allows final perceptual shift to occur naturally. The disorientation you've been feeling will transform into clarity. The exhaustion will shift into sustainable energy. The oscillation will stabilize into consistent quantum awareness. The gap will close, not because you did everything perfectly, but because you navigated consciously enough to allow natural completion. And new reality you've been approaching? You're in it, right now. You just needed to develop perception that could recognize it. This is quantum reflex. This is the gap between realities. This is consciousness learning to see what was always here, but what old perception couldn't access. The gap is closing. You're crossing. Welcome to new reality, which was always unified field. You just learned to perceive quantum mechanically. You made it. You're here. And nothing will ever be the same.